What's up, coaches? This is the Football Coaching Podcast. I am Daniel Chamberlain, co-host, here with Joe Daniel, as always.
What's up, Coach?
It's the tail end of Christmas break, Coach. For me, I'm, like you this year, I didn't teach, so I'm on permanent break. But
yeah,
Christmas is over. We're recording this the day before, 2 days before New Year's, so getting the last of the work in for the week, right?
New Year's Eve. Yes, Monday morning was rough, but now it's Friday afternoon. So,
right.
Which
is good.
It is as you mentioned, we don't teach and are not really held to any sort of schedule other than, the schedule of the rest of the family. And the fact that we do have to, work at some point. But it is very difficult to convince yourself to take time off because my natural inclination is to just work and just and this year I screwed it up. I ended up working Christmas Eve. I worked Monday. My plan was to take both weeks off, and then I was like, I don't know that I can do that.
Right.
We did a promotion, and that ended a couple days after Christmas, and so I needed to be around, at least check in on that. So, but I ended up doing Monday and Tuesday last week, and then took off Christmas Day. And this is my first day back. And as I said, Monday morning was rough, but now it's Friday afternoon. Planning to take the rest of the week off. So far, I will say this, and I'll talk about it in my level up, I guess. But so far, I have not actually had a day off. I'm still working on that. It's one of those things where if you don't really, really, really like violently protect your time, then somebody else will take it.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where we're at.
It's been odd, obviously, doing the podcasting where we're constantly we want to bring in fresh voice and guests and all that, right? And so getting them during the season's impossible. So you start trying to plan, like we all get a break, and most people are on break, and so you're like, hey, let's have podcast guests.
Yeah, we're all off, yeah.
But they also don't want to do it in the middle of their break, so it's like it becomes difficult. You told me very early on in this game, like getting guests is, you just quit doing it because it's a it becomes a hassle. Or you get it all done and then they have to back out last minute or whatever. And I'm 100% feeling that. Like it's
the worst is, and I did a brief time with college coaches where I was going and tracking down college. Kirk Ferentz was fantastic, and Bill Legg was the offense coordinator at Marshall at the time, and a few other college coaches were on, and the college coaches were harder to get because I don't have those contacts really. We have Ricky Coons on the show, but like I know Ricky's a personal friend. Like that's different. Right. The college coaches were harder to get to because you usually had to go through a gatekeeper. But if you got them, their time is controlled, especially like a Kirk Ferentz. Everything is scheduled out. Once you're on the schedule, you're not coming off the schedule. High school coaches, much more seat of their pants. Most of them, they don't have a gatekeeper, and they're happy to be on the show. But the show is not the priority.
Right.
The priority is their football team. And so what would often happen was something would happen, a crisis happens within their team or their family or their and being on your little podcast, especially early on, being on your little podcast is not a priority. For some guys now, being on this podcast is a priority.
Right.
And so anything was a big enough crisis because everything in that priorities pyramid, in their personal priorities pyramid, everything was above football coaching podcast. For a lot of guys, not everybody. And so, we would lose a lot of time trying to schedule, going back and forth. What about this time? What about this time? And so it was just, they would be easy to get in touch with, easy to get on the schedule, and then hard to keep. So that's why you'll hear more repeated guests.
Yes.
We know for the most part, like, the guys who we've had on the show that are going to be able to be on the show again. You'll also hear more people who have something to promote because they have skin in the game, and this is marketing for them. And so all of that is, and if I was a full-time podcaster, it would be worth all of that. But I'm not a podcaster. This is one thing that I do that's, almost, it's very important to the business, but I don't make money off of it. I mean, I don't make money directly off of this. We don't do ads. It's marketing for the stuff that we already have. So I never wanted to be, one of the things that we know is that if you're not an expert at something, the best way to become an expert, Daniel can attest to this, the best way to become an expert is to talk to them on a recorded podcast. And then everybody thinks you're an expert. And so for somebody who's getting into this, if I were smart in 2010, when I started doing 2009, when I started doing this, I would have done a podcast and gone out and found coaches that made me sound like an expert. I did more of that then. I did for a long time. I would go find whoever had the newest book or video on Championship Productions or on Coach's Choice because I knew they had something to promote. But those interview style podcasts, the purpose of those interview style podcasts is to promote, either to make a bunch of money or to raise yourself as the host to the level of expert. And I'm already past that, and it's not what I want to do. And so it's not important to me, the interviews at this point, but it is hard to get them on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I also get a lot of people that think it's just an interview show. Like we want you on to interview. It's like, I want you to sit down and drink a coffee or a cold beer or whatever the time of day we record and enjoy some conversation. I think you kind of hit that with Coach Ferentz up there when you basically said you quit talking about his upper level and just let's talk about something very small, right? We brought Bill Blankenship on the first time. It was like, I know you're the head coach of the Rams. I just want you to come on and talk offensive line blocking or whatever we end up talking about. Right?
So. And I like doing that, talking to coaches about something they don't get to talk about. Kirk, like when's the last time somebody asked Kirk Ferentz about offensive line play?
Right.
Like that's not something that the head coach at Iowa gets asked. Yeah. And so I liked doing that. I did not want to do interviews. Sometimes I like having the older guys just tell their story because it's usually wild. The stories are the stories of, I mean, even like Coach Mountjoy, like, being a coach with the replacement players in 1987. That was one of the things that he did. And like that kind of stuff is just like wild stories. And he spent a ton of time with Coach Gibbs and Coach Bugle and all, the different Washington coaches. And so those stories interest me. Stories interest me, but like, tell me about your 2019 season and you went 9-3 that year. How did you feel? I don't care. I really don't care. Like, it doesn't matter to me. Talk to me about a blocking scheme or tell me a story that's kind of cool and entertaining.
Absolutely.
Mike was one. Mike Carter that we had on. Mike had great stories from, we kind of built it around Glazier clinics and clinic season and all of that. But he had great stories about Frank Glazier. So, that's like just fun to have somebody come talk about with stories.
Yep. Well, I guess, man, I know that your day has to go on and mine does as well. Let's pay some bills and we're going to talk a little bit of interior defensive fronts today. So
yeah,
pay the bills first. We'll get after it.
Yeah, well, since we're talking defense, go to joedanielfootball.com/system and you can download a free guide to building your ultimate defensive system. And that guide's going to walk you through what's in a system, why you need a system, how to install your system, and the 5 mistakes that you must avoid in putting your system together for the upcoming season. So to build your ultimate defensive system, get the guide that is on it at joedanielfootball.com/system.
Perfect. Quickly, we'll talk about athleticspeedandmovement.com. It is that time of year. It is the time for you to start thinking about speed training. It is easier to build that into your culture or your schedule or your everyday drills now when you don't have the pressure of winning on Friday nights kind of looking you in the face. So it's a good time to get started. That way it just becomes natural. The kids will be more efficient at it. So when you do get into your summer workouts, your fall camp, and your game weeks, you're already kind of doing this, and you can just continue training speed instead of trying to start training speed. Plus, obviously, you want to be faster when the season starts, not when the season ends. So, athleticspeedmovement.com. Jump over there and get Del Basquet's system. He's been working on it since 76, long time ago. 1900s, as the kids nowadays would say. He's been working on it since the 1900s. So jump over to athleticspeedmovement.com, sign up today. Let's talk ball. Question 1, we're going to talk, just how we're aligning those interior defensive linemen. And I'm sure that it can, a lot of times has to pair with your outside lineman too, especially if you're an odd front. But really want to look at what are the different alignments you can use with that nose tackle, defensive tackle types. So what are kind of some ones you've used historically, and maybe some you haven't ever used, but you've drawn on a board and said, hey, maybe this would work?
There's so much in it. And in fact, I wrote a newsletter, an 8-page, may have been 12, but I think it was only 8 pages, only 5,000 words, about 3-tech alignment of the 3-tech, the defensive tackle, strong side defensive tackle alignment, and pulling levers with that, with simply the alignment. And this, I think I went into a stance a little bit too, and the levers and things that you could do with that position, with that one guy, situationally to help solve problems. So there's kind of like the offensive line. It starts with, we talk about a lot of guys will have that playbook their first year, especially when they get a youth head coaching job out of nowhere, and they get their playbook together, and it's got all sorts of plays, and all the linemen have T's over top of them, right? They're almost an afterthought. And the defensive line coach will say, you're head up on the guards, or you are, in the gap between the guard and the tackle, or whatever it is. They'll put them somewhere, and that's kind of where the coaching ends. And then it's be tough, be physical, and there's not much coaching after that. Not because they're lazy, but because they just don't know if you start out, you get thrown into it. It's hard to get into the minuscule details. I remember my very first varsity coaching job was the defensive line coach. And in fact, I guess I had the whole defensive line. I don't remember. I know I just coached the tight end on offense, but I guess I had the whole defensive line. And I didn't know anything. And we were a 4-4. And it was like just, putting guys in gaps and stuff. The same thing when we installed the 3-5-3, I knew a little bit more, but it was still just slanting, right? Just slant to the gap, slant right or slant left. What do? You just step right and go. So alignment wise, it starts with the old, zero, even numbers are head up, odd numbers are outside shade, alignment techniques, tag an eye onto it for inside shade. So 0 is head up on the center, 2 is head up on the guard, 4 is head up on the tackle, 6 is head up on the tight end. And then the Bear Bryant system, which is you've got a 1 is a shade on the center, a 3 is an outside shade. You can't have an inside shade on the center. That doesn't exist. So you got a 1 is a shade on the center. Some guys will call that just a shade.
Right.
But it was argued and argued and argued. And I don't know if we did it on this podcast. It was on this podcast, but it may have been before you came on the podcast. I broke down an old, it was an Oklahoma playbook, old Oklahoma playbook. Maybe the 80s, maybe even earlier. And in that playbook, it's because somebody was like, well, this is, Oklahoma system or something like that. And in that playbook from long ago, it was like, it can be called a shade or a 1. And I was like, there, it's in the playbook from 100 years ago. It was a weird argument to get into, but then, 3 is outside shade of the guard, 5 is outside shade of the tackle. And then 9 is outside shade of the tight end, Bear Bryant's system, and then a 2-eye is inside shade of the guard. Some people will call that a 1, and that's why they call it a shade and a 1. So they would have a 1. But see, that breaks the rule of
Tag an
odd
eye.
numbers and eyes and everything. And so we would call it a 2-eye inside shade of the guard, a 4-eye inside shade of the tackle, and that's almost universal. 4-eye is almost universal. 4-eye, 4-5 is like the one spot where we don't have a problem, and everybody knows what a 3 tech is.
Right.
So 2, 3, 4-eye, 4, 5, everybody's fine. 6 is generally accepted, but then inside shade of the tight end, I will call it a 6-eye because it's 2-eye, 4-eye, 6-eye. But in the Bear Bryant system, it was called a 7, and because Bear Bryant's Bear Bryant, that's what it became. And so we call it a 7 tech. And my players will just learn over time that even though I'm supposed to say 6-eye, I will say 7 all the time. And they learn the 6-eye and a 7 are the same. It's just, it's one of those immersion language things where you go, well, that's confusing. It is until you've said it 1,000 times, and then it's not confusing anymore, right? It's
I have a question. Do you think there's any truth? I don't remember where I heard it, but I heard that he was drunk the night that he wrote up this numbering system. And then by the time it got shared, it was too late to change. So he just ran with it. Do you think there's any truth there? Have you ever heard that rumor or that?
I think I've heard
legend?
that, but I don't know. I mean, yeah, maybe.
That'd be pretty funny if just like Jack Daniels actually wrote this rule.
Yeah, I mean, it's all in the family. The numbering system, that's kind of the universal numbering system. And you'll notice in that there is no gap alignment. There is no gap alignment. There's a reason for that. There's a very good reason for that. So starting off with the number, there's 2 rules. One is that I would teach my defensive linemen. One is we read the block of the offensive lineman, right? In order to read the block of the offensive lineman, we must be making contact with an offensive lineman. So the gap is never the place to be. Inside shade, outside shade, whatever. But the gap, there's nobody to read. So all that you do when you line up in the gap, and this is very, very common, especially early on for defensive line coaches. So we're going to just shoot through the gap. It's like that's you'll run into these old school veer teams, and they'll have 3-foot splits. You'll go, we're just going to run through the gap. They'll never get us. Those guys spend their entire life down blocking, down block, down block, down block, down block. And when you just try to go run straight through the gap, they down block you to hell, and you won't touch anything. And they'll be the easiest block of the day for them, because when you hit a guy running sideways, it's real easy to move them. So there's no gap alignment. There's loose alignments, which we, that's the next thing. But so we can light up head up, inside shade, or outside shade. In general, in your 40 fronts, most of the time, like the 4-3. The 4-3 is a great example. In the 4-3, the strong side 3 technique, defensive tackle, outside shade of the guard on the strong side. The defensive end on the strong side, if there's a tight end, is in a 9 technique, outside shade of the tight end. Weak side, you have a 1 technique nose, and you have a 5 technique defensive end. The reason for that is the whole purpose of the defensive front in the 4-3 is to fly, run fast, spill the football, wrong arm, whatever, all of that stuff. And so what they wanted in the Miami 4-3, what they wanted was 4 positions that were all the same. Everybody's interchangeable, and nobody needs to be particularly big. We're all just squeezing down blocks, basically fighting reach blocks, block to and block away. And that was the concept behind that, and it works very well. But you have to be able to coach that detail of the defense up. There cannot be any up the field. It just kills everything. It's block down, step down, block down, squeeze down, whatever. And run away, block away is run away, all that kind of stuff. And that's critical. So everybody was an outside shade there. You go to a 4-2 or a 4-4 or a 6-2, it changes. And this is assuming that you're still in a shade and not in a head up. It changes in that you now will play a 3 tech still stays the same, but on the tight end, you will more commonly play a 6-eye or a 7, or maybe a 6 technique head up. But even that head up 6 technique is still inside conscious. He's still
Right.
So the difference is, instead of having C gap open with and in the 4-3, we would tilt the defensive ends. So now you get in a whole different thing of whether we're going to tilt them, we're going to keep them square. We would tilt those defensive ends almost to a 45 degree so that they are crashing down the line of scrimmage and they are closing off the C gap that way, really. But it's C gap open or C gap closed. Well, once we went to the 4-2 or 4-4, it's all the same. It doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is that those linebackers are no longer in the box. So in the 4-3, we had a linebacker standing over top of the C gap. In the 4-2, we slide that linebacker out. And now if I leave a 9 technique, I have no C gap defender. Or my linebackers are 2 gapped, and it's a whole different deal. You're going to end up in a 4-3 again. And so in the 4-2, now you have to teach a 6-eye or a 6. And then on the weak side, more coaches will run a 2-eye. It's the old 44G. Virginia Tech was pretty well known for that. The 4-4G front, where the G is the guard, so inside shade of the guard. So, and then there's all sorts of other things. There's stack 4-4s. I think I have a book. The 44 split defense, which is like, you don't see much of that. You'll see the old like Irk Russell at the Junkyard 8. So there's all sorts of variations on the 4-4 that, stack 4-4s and split 4-4s. But the base 4-4, you start using some inside shades. So the outside shade is great for squeezing down blocks. It's simple. For me, it's the best alignment as far as if I don't have to teach anything. The problem is you have to do it great. And so this is why the Miami 4-3 isn't just the defense that everybody runs, because the defensive line is the easiest to teach across the board and can be the most aggressive. But everyone behind, they have to be 100% squeezing down blocks. They cannot fail on that, because that will break that defense immediately. So the defensive line coach must be detail oriented and adamant in the alignment of the outside shade is not in a gap. It is tight. So I can't read it with my eyes. I have to physically try to contact that guy. And if he hits me, I fight the reach, or I work through the down block, or if I get the down block, I squeeze it down, block away, run away, all that. And behind it, everybody else, the stakes get higher. The linebackers must, because it is now a 2-gap Mike backer in all likelihood. If it's not a 2-gap Mike backer, then it is a failure on the weak side flats, a total failure on the weak side flats if it's not the Mike backer. That's the most common thing in the 4-3 that we see, is people who put their defensive linemen in the things that we just said, and then they put a linebacker over the C gap, open C gap, a linebacker over the strong side A gap, and a linebacker over the weak side B gap. Now they have no weak side force support. They can go to a cover 2, but that's not very common. We can very easily now put 2 receivers split out on that weak side, and you're either going to leave somebody uncovered, you can leave the bubble wide open, or you're going to go to straight man coverage, whatever it is. I'm going to identify your coverage that way. And so we see that as a major, major flaw. In the 4-3, the Mike backer is a 2-gap linebacker, and he is in a train wreck if you play a team that goes downhill. And then behind it, most teams will go quarters instead of cover 2 now. Cover 3 doesn't work. It just doesn't fit properly with the 4-3. It becomes a 4-2 essentially. It has to. So you run quarters behind it, and now the safeties have to be dudes. And so that's where the 4-3's flaw is. I got to have a man at 3 tech really helps. I got to have a Mike backer that's a dude. I got to have 2 safeties that are dudes. So of all the defenses we have, and everybody must be coached to a high level of precision, very detail oriented. So I can't do it with a small staff or an inexperienced staff. I can't do it at a school where I don't know that I'm going to have quality players coming in and out. So usually it has to be a bigger school. Like I've always said, if I got a job, if I decided to get a job coaching college again, I have 4-3 all day. But if I went to a really big school, if I went to a, one of those Tulsa powerhouse schools where I knew that I'm going to have 11 dudes every year, maybe 4-3. As long as I can have coaches, and they can get coaches. So anyway, so you start working more inside shades, and the problem is that now instead of everybody playing in an outside shade, and it's we're doing the same thing every play, I got to start teaching how to play an inside shade and how to play an outside shade. And there's reasons for the outside shade. One of which is, so the 2-eye. Like I still prefer to play a 1 technique on the weak side in a 4-2 and a 40 front. But I know like Bill Weiss had a lot of success running up with the 2-eye. He ran 2-eye as his base, or the G style, and it condenses that B gap. So because if you have a 1 tech, you can very easily get ISO'd on that wheel backer.
Right.
So you start to use the 2-eye to keep from getting down blocked. So we like the outside shade because we can squeeze down blocks and spill the football. The inside shade keeps us from getting down blocked. It condenses gaps. It doesn't allow us to just, we've got to attack that guy. But now we're not as effective in the spill. So if you fight against the down block, instead of aligning to use the down block, you are less likely to get down blocked, but you're not as effective spilling. So there's weird things to think about there. And then if we go head up, there's 2 reasons to go head up. You see a lot more head up in the odd fronts. 4-0-4. So 0 tech nose guard, 2-4 technique, defensive tackles or defensive ends. If you're a 3-4 or 3-3, there's 2 reasons to do that. And you can do it. You can do it also in a 6-2, not a 6-2. 4-4, 4-2, 6-2. Doesn't matter what you want to call it. You can run a heads front. It's not a good idea in the 4-3 because I can very likely end up with there's too much space.
Yes.
So the one rule I mentioned that there's 2 rules. One is that we never line up in the gap. So I should go back and mention the other rule. The other rule is that there are never 2 gaps open. And so, like our linebackers, you don't have to know as a linebacker everything about what the defensive line is supposed to do in the call, especially if you're younger linebackers. But if you see 2 open gaps, you know that you can't cover that.
Right.
Because that means that a lineman is releasing directly on you, and it's bad news. So you can't have 2 open gaps. So in the 4-3, we wouldn't want a 2 and a 9. That's a bad idea. Definitely wouldn't want a 2-eye and a 9, but we want a 2 and a 9. So 2 reasons that you would use a head-up technique. One is to be a 2-gap defender. And there's different things that people read. They can read hat and hands. They can read the feet. Jerry Campbell had a really good read, just mirror step with the feet. And I didn't know it, but that's what I did when I played nose. I was 165 pounds. We were at the highest level in the state of Georgia, so I was playing against guys that were going. My very first game was against a center who was going to Georgia. And I didn't, out of sheer survival, I cut every play basically. I cut through the legs and crabbed for something. I tried to take the center and the guard out, and our linebackers got a lot of tackles. I grade out at 95%. I get 1 tackle. That was my job. But I would read the feet, and so if the center stepped right, I was cutting through the center's foot. Now, if he was trying to reach me, then I would be going the direction of the play. If he was trying to down block the next guy, I was cutting him off from getting the down block, and I would also try to take the guard before he got the pull. Sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. Sometimes I was just sacrificial lamb. But if he was trying to go, if the center was trying to go down, block back to the backside linebacker or to the 4 tech, that meant that the front side guard was coming down to me. So I didn't have to get the backside guard pulling if I could take out the center and the guard. Because I can tell you right now, they did not, double teaming me was not the priority.
No.
So it's just a numbers game. So I did that out of survival, I guess. Because that was just my senior year, 2 nose guards. We had 2 senior nose guards, both friends of mine for different reasons, decided not to play, and they needed somebody. And so you can key the feet. It was a Jerry Campbell stimulus response was key the feet. And if the foot steps left, you just mirror step. So just taught a mirror step. I taught that 1 year at my first year at Amelia. We ran a 4-3, a college 4-3, which is, other than the fact that there are 4 defensive linemen and 4 linebackers, college 4-3, completely different from the Miami 4-3. They're very different defenses. So it was a mirror step. It looked more like a 4-2 in a lot of ways. Like if you just saw it, you would probably think of it as a 4-2 because the original design was a 4-3, but because you play so many spreads and stuff, your adjuster ends up walked out a lot. And that happens in the 4-3, Miami 4-3 as well. But so you can mirror step and 2-gap. And then the other thing that you use for head up is to slant and to kind of disguise where you're going and to either slant inside or slant outside. And there's a whole new podcast on slant technique. But essentially what it does is disguise what front you're going to be in. At the end of the day, we end up in an overfront, an underfront, a bear front, which is a 3-0-3. An overfront is a 3-tech and a 9-tech, and then a 1 and a 5 backside, or a 3-tech and a 6-tech and a 1 backside. You end up at a 3 and a 1, three technique strong side, 1 technique, somebody in B gap strong side, somebody in A gap weak side. Or you end up in somebody in A gap strong side and somebody in B gap weak side, which is an underfront. Or you end up with both A gaps filled, right? So you end up in one of those. The old coaches used to call it some coaches still do. They'll call their defense, a 31. And that just means we have a 3 and a 1, or they'll call 11, or they'll call 22, or they'll call 13 or whatever. And so that's how they call their defensive front. And it's just by aligning those defensive tackles. But at the end of the day, they line up. Your interior guys, who we're really talking about, your interior guys end up in a 3 and a 1, a 1 and a 3, or 2 1s, just for simplicity. And that's so you use heads up fronts to disguise either to 2 gaps so that you're always right, even though that's the hardest technique to teach. If you get it right, you're always right. Kind of like pattern match. Pattern match on paper, you're always right. The reality is you're not always right. So things that have more on paper good for them are easier or more likely to break. So when you 2 gap, you have to read it, and you might be right. You should be right. And my biggest issue with it was and our defense coordinator has since passed away, that I ran that under, but it was a great system. But he came from a situation where he was at a private school, and he had his kids at 6 a.m. They would have a meeting, and then it was the old 3-hour practices and all this sort of stuff. And so he would tinker. He was fantastic, amazing at watching film. And in a college environment or in an environment like that, it's different. He would tinker, and he would look at the film, and he would go, if we read this guy, we're going to be in the right place every single time. If we do this, we're going to be in the right place every single time. He came from an environment where his guys played one way, and he would work 4 hours a day on this stuff. And they were real smart kids, and they were, it was the way things were done. And it was a different time where this was what they were doing. They weren't missing out on anything being at practice for 3 hours. Right. Our kids are missing out on a million things. So they probably were missing out on stuff, but it wasn't as obvious. Right. And so now we're having 2-hour and 15-minute practices with kids who play both ways. It's not a private school. It's a small rural school. And when we installed the system initially, I really liked the 2-gap for the defensive tackle. I was the defensive line coach that year, and I liked the 2-gap system, and we were starting to get it. But then we would change. And so that was my frustration with it. So I think the 2-gap I like if that's what you're going to do every single snap. But you have to be one of those people who is willing to just commit to a thing and do it until you're right. That's why I would never make pattern match coverages my secondary coverage, right? I would never be like, oh, we're a cover 3 team, and then we run a little bit of quarters. It's like, no, you run a little bit of busted coverage is what you run. So yeah, that's a long way of, that's all of the alignments that you can run really, and the purposes behind them. It's all about reaction to the offensive line blocks. And then there's other, which we can get into, but there's other reasons, as far as what you're expecting. But as far as base alignments, that, if you play more outside shades, it's because you want to squeeze and spill. If you play more inside shades, it's to protect against getting down blocked, protect against getting squeezed. If you play heads up, it's to kind of disguise where you're going to end up.
You talked about over and under fronts. I was taught that is basically where you would align if there's a tight end, right? So if you're in an over front, you're either head up or outside of him. If it's an under front, you're inside of him. Because of the rule number 2, you can't have 2 consecutive open gaps.
Well, the actual wording, verbiage of over or under is if you start in a heads front, double twos. If you slide over toward the tight end, that's over to the tight end, and then you could call it away or whatever, but just under, it was over and under.
Okay,
under front is away from the tight end. Yeah,
terminology.
Well, it's all built around the tight end. Absolutely. And of course those waters become muddy when everybody's coming out in 10 personnel,
or in 2 tight or 13 personnel or
2 tights is a little bit more. I would always say in 2 tights you can always identify the true tight end, usually in what we see, or the extra offensive lineman, and that's the guy. And then the other guy will play inside shade of. If you're an over front 4-3, you align to the tight end, you're over front, and so that's the guy you're playing the 9 tech on, because that's where they're more likely to run. There's still a guy that they're more likely to run to. And like if you get 3 tight ends, okay, the over side, the strong side is the one with 2 of them on it, or 3 or whatever. But
right.
But the 10 personnel stuff, especially if it's just a 2x2 doubles, you now have to look at. Usually, you can look at the width of the field, but depending on the team, especially the spread option teams, you sometimes need to look at the backfield to get a really clear picture of what you want, because of the set of the back in an offset gun. Pistol, again, muddies the waters even more. The more balanced it gets, the more muddy the waters get. But pistol muddies the waters even more. But if you have an offset back, there's basically one way that the quarterback can read his zone read, or can run power read, or whatever they're going to do.
Yeah.
Speed option. But not the speed option. Speed option doesn't affect the interior lineman, but.
Yeah, that's the 2x2 stuff gets fun to break down. You get to learn a lot of tendencies that way. Question 2 here is, why you kind of went through some of the whys, but let's just kind of talk advantages and disadvantages of some of these fronts, I guess. Starting with just a base over front, a 3 and a 1. Why would I use that versus heads up or the G front? You talked about the G front. So let's just kind of walk through some of those, specifically on the inside lineman. And I guess if you go to an odd front and you're in 4 eyes, everybody's an inside lineman. But why would we pick any one of those over the others?
So if you go back from the offensive standpoint, what we teach in the pistol power offense system from Coach Mountjoy is the red side and the white side. So the red is reduced, white is wide. So every front has a red and a white side. That terminology comes from the old 5-2 defenses, and that being the start, kind of the starting point. If we start from a 5-2, which is a 4-0-4 alignment, if we reduced that's the eagle, where you would eagle the guy down. He would come down inside to an eye or whatever. If the B gap is closed, there are red side plays and there are white side plays. The reason to play the 3 tech on the strong side is you're putting your best defensive lineman, that 3 tech, in the B gap. And so from the 3 tech, he can condense the A gap. He is harder to down block because he's your best guy. And you can't really ISO there, right? You can't run at him. So he is there in that B gap. He's in a great position to squeeze down. You can try to trap him, but that's what we expect, is the inside trap play. And so he's in a position to squeeze that down block. It's the 3 tech is almost like the universal, like, it's good. It's like, a lot of things that we talk about in football is there's, if you look at defensive play calling, right? There's the base, there's disguise, and there's aggressive calls. So the base call is your, whatever your base alignment is in defense. It's good against everything. It's not great against anything. The 3-tech is pretty solid against everything in its own little world, right? Everything around it affects it. It's not great against anything. So you put it in a position where you put that 3-tech in a position where it's a good place to be. And then you coach up the technique, and you put your best guy there, and you hope that your best guy is going to be pretty good at everything, and just make it great. To whereas in the other positions, we're putting guys more in spots that are have a purpose, knowing that it weakens something else, and knowing that we may not have our best guy there. So then the 2-eye alignment, like I said, the 3-tech is good because it closes off, it puts you in a great position to defend off tackle runs, but also to squeeze A-gap runs and squeeze traps and everything. So from that outside shade, if the guard down blocks, I can squeeze it and I can spill the trap. I can wrong arm the trap. So I can close off A-gap runs. I can rush the passer because I'm an interior rusher. I can get a decent pass rush. From the outside shade spot, it's a better pass rush.
So like when you start getting pulling guards, that's when I like to use the G front, right? Is like, because I know you said the 3 is good against everything, but it seems like these inside shades are great against down blocks and pulling guards. This year alone, we struggled with getting a tackle to down a 4-eye. Like, especially if he rode the fence between a 4-eye and a 4.
It's a base block now. Yeah, it's not a down block.
Yeah, it became very, very difficult. And when you're trying to run GT counter and build a wall and you can't get that down, that sucks. But what was worse was trying to pull across the face of a 2-eye who's more aggressive, right? They're attacking that inside shoulder. Now they're just in your way. Like, it seems like against gap scheme stuff, those 2-eyes and 4-eyes really put the offense in a kind of a pickle.
Well, the 2-eye, the 2-eye, like you said, he's not on a run to his side. He is in an effective place because that's what we, going back to the reason we would use that 2-eye, he's harder to down block. So if we go to that 2-eye and you want to run a counter and down block a 1 technique, that's a pretty easy block for the guard to down block on the 1 technique. Right. Now, if he has to base block, the guard has to basically base block. We'll still call it down, but it's a base block. A 2-eye, it's a much more difficult. It takes away his angle for that down block. Yeah. So that's going to be effective for him. Now, as far as if the guy that he's lined up on is pulling, meaning that the run is going away from him, he becomes an easy down block for the center. That should be what's happening, is now the 2-eye is an easy down block back for the center. So a 3 and a 1. So again, this all goes to game planning and stuff. A 3 and a 1 makes it hard for you to run strong side power. The center has to make that base block on the nose. The 3-tech is there, probably getting the double team. He's the best guy. So what happens now is if you can't get your tight end, especially if you don't want to use a tight end, you're not going to run power very well because my will linebacker in a 4-2 is going to fly with the guard pull. And you can either come off of your double team on my 3-tech, my best defensive lineman, to get him, or he's going to run free and either take an A-gap run through, which kills the play, or he's going to scrape over and continue the spill. That's why I like to use a tight end. We use a tight end because it gives us 3 guys to account for the backside linebacker against a 40 front. Right? We have a hinge block backside in case he blitzes, this backside tackle. We have the double team combo, which looks for him to try to shoot through the front side A gap if he reads the pull, and then we have the tight end coming for the down block on him to the A gap area. So the 3 and the 1 set together, and it's you almost have to look at these in partnerships, right? In 40 front, but the 3 and the 1 is really good against strong side runs. But now you've opened up the weak side ISO because your 1-tech is easy to down block, or the counter also being a potential problem. Because the 1-tech is easier to down block. So the 2-eye is going to be better against weak side runs. So if you want to run weak side ISO, if you want to run, which of course you have to have a 2-back run team, Now that could be a back and a quarterback, but you have to have a two-back run team so that they can actually do that. A wing T can use the wing in there or whatever, but those are going to be, you use your 2-eye on the weak side for the counters. I have gotten to like what we call Indy front. We're not allowed to call it the Indian front anymore. You're in Oklahoma. Still, I know you have different rules on this. We call it Indy. Most of our coaches have changed the name to Indy. And the Indy front, double 2 eyes, is a great front because you are hard to down block on both sides. You're base blocking, but the tackle now gets a free release. If tackle gets free release, your back's a linebacker. But it's really hard to run traps. Obviously, it closes off the A gaps. So if you want to do things, that's an obvious short yardage. Double 2 eyes is generally a run defense type of thing, and we can use double 2 eyes to close off the A gaps, close off quarterback sneaks, close off inside traps, make it harder to down block on them. I love double 2 eye against option teams. If you get those 10 personnel option teams, especially pistol, where I don't know which way you're going to go, but I want my backers to be able to tango, to be able to gap exchange, so that my 5 tech can squeeze down on a down block, and I get my linebacker on your quarterback rather than my defensive end. I love double 2 eyes in those situations. Harder to down block because you're getting that veer blocking, or zone blocking. 2 eyes can be difficult for some zone teams, and how the inside zone teams and how they're going to overtake that. So I like double 2 eyes in that situation. The one that is the biggest risk in high school, because we're facing teams that are 70% or more run, is double 3s. And double 3s is what we call outlaw. And outlaw or out, or whatever you want to call it, out is double 3s, and that's a pass rush. And you've got to know when to use that, because we know in high school that the most dynamic runner, a lot of times we would rather him throw than run. And so we will tend not to use that very much, because it opens up the A-gap escapes, the quarterback to run up the middle. And we see if we get into a 3rd and 17 against a big chunk of the teams on our schedule, including us, quarterback draw is as likely or more than any other call on the call sheet. And if I'm defending quarterback draw, double 3 techs is not the way to go.
Not the call.
I'd almost say in that run situation, we're better off in double 2 eyes, right? Because we got a firmer set there. So partnering those together, and I guess that include the 3 tech is a great alignment, is a good alignment for pass rush. Like I said, it's the Swiss Army knife alignment, right? We can do a little bit of everything pretty well. Is it great for anything? I mean, it's better for squeezing down blocks, but you're going to get down blocked by the tackle too. So, what are you going to accomplish with it? It's good for everything. It's not great for anything. I think that's, and then your double 2s, like I said, you're disguising the front. And so we go double 2s. We're either going to, we call it Toro aim. Took it from TCU. Toro is slant to the call, slant to the strength to the tight end. Aim is slant away. So we're going to end up in a 3 and a 1, a 1 and a 3. And everything we just said about 1 and a 3, flip it for your underfront. Underfront does something completely different if you're using the 4-3 underfront. But if you're just talking 3 and a 1 versus a 1 and a 3, just flip it. Like, okay, that makes us have the Swiss Army knife over here, and a little bit. It really strengthens up our weak side. If you want to run weak side ISO, it's very, very strong against it. It just changes the look of everything. But the double 2s, you're either going to slant to a 3 and a 1, slant to a 1 and a 3, or pinch to essentially double 2 eyes. So you're just disguising where you're going to end up. It's not if you think about these things in terms of when you game plan, and this is something we really, really stress with the 33 stack. And all of this, zero techniques is all the same. It's, when you talk about 33 stack, head up, you're disguising what you're going to create. We talk about, especially with the 33 stack, we talk about creating fronts. If you think about double 2s as creating fronts, you think about what do we need to stop? Well, let's say that we're playing a wing T team, and they like to run trap. Well, I want to run double two eyes. If I'm playing a wing T team and they like to run the weak side belly with the wing coming inside and ISOing, right? The ISO play. Then I'm going to run an underfront and I'm going to close off that weak side B gap. What do I expect them to run here? If they like to run buck sweep, I probably just 3-1 is probably the best because I've got my best players shaded towards where they're going to, the strength of where they're going to run it. Some coaches would say we want to run twos and try to, attack the guards. But I'm sure that you've been around enough wing T coaches to know that that's like the most exciting thing in the world for them. It's like, thank you. We'll just down block the hell out of you and
off to the races.
Because that's the kind of stuff that's like gaps. And again, coaches who haven't done it a whole lot will go, well, the wing T doesn't work. You can't run the wing T on us. I bet somebody can. And then they'll say, well, how do you stop it? Tell me the secrets. And they go, well, we just lined up in the gaps and shot the gaps. It's like, you played a bad wing T team. And they might have scored a lot of points against other teams. So they scored all these points. It's like, okay, I'm not talking about how good their athletes are. I'm talking about how good their offensive line is. That doesn't work. Well, we shot the gaps. That doesn't work. Well, we just wrapped up the guards. Well, they weren't very good down blockers and pullers because, that's the kind of like backyard type of stuff that'll work against the bad teams. And you're like, I've solved football and the wing T is antiquated. And then you'll play the good wing T team and you won't understand why you gave up 78 points because that doesn't work.
I had a whole thing I was going to say, and I forgot. You started talking about wing T, and my brain went to sleep. Antiquated offenses. Yeah, who knows?
Kenny must be going well.
All right, so last question here. How can we pair this up with our linebacker or safeties to obviously fit run support? I know we're not really talking defensive ends, but I'll just start here. We ran 4 eyes a lot this year, right? In an odd front, 4 eyes and a 0, or we'd shade him one way or the other. Sometimes we'd run like a 4 and a 5 or a 4 eye and a 5, stuff like that. But in that defense, a lot of times our safeties end up being C-gap players, and so our linebackers can kind of free roam a little more. Obviously, keeping with the Joe Daniel football, linebackers don't have gaps assigned, right? They fit open windows. It made it work really well. But how can I pair? I mean, does the 31 versus flipping them and I'm going an underfront with a 1 and a 3 or 2 eyes, does that change how I'm pairing that with my linebackers, whether it's inside or outside, etc.?
Yeah, well, I mean, go back to base rule number 1. I can't have 2. Well, base rule number 2, I guess, in the order that I did them. For me, number 1 is I can't have 2 open gaps. And so, like, I can't run a 2 eye on the side of a 9 technique if I run the 4-3. Right, it's out. You mentioned the 4 eyes. If I run a double 4, if I run a 4 eye and a 5, I know that my nose can't go weak because then I've got A gap, B gap open to the side of the 5. So I have seen people run 30 fronts with double 5 with 2 5s, a 0 and 2 5s, and I don't like that at all. Unless I just have an animal who can truly 2 gap, A gap. And the thing about 2 gapping, as I said, 2 gap turn. I don't know if I got into 2 gapping enough. 2 gapping turns into a 1 gap. It's kind of like pattern match is zone that turns into man. 2 gapping is turns into a slant. And so when I key the feet, if you just use that, like I said, what I would do is if I saw him, if he stepped 1 step to the left, I was shooting to my right. I was shooting that gap. That just told me where to go. So I was getting the read off of that first, and then I was just ripping, crabbing, running fast as I could through there, getting hammered, getting killed. There was a kid that went to South Carolina that would just I was actually friends with him outside of football, and he just double underhooked me every single time. He had a 400-pound bench press. It was the most miserable day of my life.
Coach, can we change it? Can we please change it? I can imagine.
Oh, well, it was it was Roswell High School actually, and it was a really good school. And he did like a mid-season transfer, and we were one game away from having to play him twice. And if that had happened, I would have just cried.
Right.
I literally think we had a timeout, and I was just like having a meltdown because I couldn't do anything during the timeout. My coach was like, "It's fine, like just fine. Just at least he's blocking you and not somebody that matters." It's like, okay. I don't think he said that, but like, you know, hey, at least it's a 1-for-1, and really it's not. It's a 2 for 0.75 trade. So, but that was that. So what I mean by that is that when you see that foot move, you don't just sit there and mirror slide him, right? You now try to beat him that direction. And either that keeps him from going where he wanted to go, down blocking someone else, which means whoever was supposed to down block you is still trying to down block you, and he's trying to go down block somebody else or reach somebody else, and he's not getting there, and so you've done a 2-for-1, or he's trying to hook you, and you're beating him to the play side. So it becomes a slant, and so you're not actually defending two gaps. The only way you can actually defend two gaps is to have a guy who can actually physically maul a center and throw him away and stand there, and that's pretty uncommon. Yeah. So I don't like the 5-0-5 alignment. But yeah, everything goes back to everything is about realistically, we want our defensive linemen to, from these alignments, defeat blocks and make plays. The very old Tommy Tuberville, beautiful tracksuit Tommy Tuberville 4-3 videos that I probably have somewhere. I probably should like get that like transferred.
Digitalized.
Yeah. That what was originally, I think, a Coach's Choice video or something, that he talks about we want our defensive linemen, because the old way of coaching defensive linemen was to take up blocks. And in the Miami 4-3, they didn't want to take up blocks, because that 1-for-1 trade, if I lined up head up, and there are people that did this, if I lined up head up and you step to the right and I just clinch you up, and you know, here we are. Which is what teams try to do with like buck sweep teams, is we're just going to line up on them and try to clinch up the guards and not let them go anywhere. Which, you know, the guards should just back up a little bit. But the way that Tommy Tuberville described it was, we tell our guys, you're on scholarship too. And so that's the mentality is, we want the defensive linemen to get off blocks. You're on our guys wouldn't understand this because they've grown up in a world where defensive linemen are, you know, featured players,
right,
and you know, pass rushers and all that stuff. But at the time, in the mid 80s and the early 90s, telling your defensive lineman, you're on scholarship too. You're supposed to go make tackles. Don't just take up blocks. Like I said, that was what I did. I took up blocks. But that was because I shouldn't have been on the field anyway. And so the best I could do was give us a little numbers advantage. But the guys that were going to the University of Miami in the 1980s and 1990s, they were on scholarship because they were great football players. Right. And a lot of them came in as linebackers and stuff. They talk about, they took the old vision of a 3-tech, of a space eater, right? They took him and they moved him to offensive line. They moved the old version of a defensive end into defensive tackle. They moved the old outside linebackers to defensive ends. They moved the old safeties to outside linebacker. They moved the old, they essentially got 2 extra DBs on the field. So it's about getting speed on the field in the 4-3, which is funny because a lot of guys think we want speed on the field, so we're going to go with the 3-3. It's like if you use the thought process behind the 4-3, that's the fastest you can get. And I'll use a wrestler type kid, quick kid at the nose, at the weak side. And so I need one defensive lineman. You can't say that in any other front. Right. You can't go less than that in any other front. Say that. So this, from the standpoint of the defensive linemen are not there to take up blocks, but if you look at it, they're the first line of defense, hence the name. So they are the first guys to engage with the offense, right? They are the first guy. There is no play where they aren't involved in contact. If you're playing a nose guard, if you're playing a 3 technique, you're in a train wreck 60 times. And that's why it's really hard to not rotate your defensive linemen, especially if they all play offensive line too. It's really hard to go out there and play 60 snaps on one side and 60 snaps on the other side, because now you're in a train wreck 120 times in a game, in an average high school game. At least in the train wreck on the offensive line side, you're not getting blindsided. You're not getting double teamed and all that sort of stuff. On the defensive line, if you're the best guy on the defensive line, you're getting hit by down blocks, you're getting hit by double teams, you're getting hit by everything in the world. You're getting wham blocked, you're getting kicked out, you're getting everything in the world. And so you are in literal, traffic coming at you from all directions, and then you got to make a tackle. But you are the one who gets to read what the offensive linemen do, and we use a physical key read, not a visual key read, because there's not enough time to visualize it. It's got to be a physical key read, and all of our key read drills in our defensive drill system, for our defensive line are built around that physical key read, and that's all that they do. That's all that they need to do, because essentially they read that key and then they go. Once there's nothing else to teach. Tackling technique, teach a block destruct, but really it's get this key read. It's going to tell you where the ball is going, and then go. Just go. So we don't run hoops, and we don't do all that stuff. Right. We don't go through chutes and sleds. We key read and go, and get to fly around, because you're on scholarship too. Our guys aren't on scholarship, but it's the idea. But everything that you do up front is from the standpoint of, how do I handle these blocks so that my linebackers can get loose? When I want my defensive linemen loose, I don't use base alignments like 3 and a 1. I use slants and stunts and twists. And that's how I use my defensive linemen to get, if I want a defensive lineman loose, I'm going to have to move them. And so that gets into a whole nother topic of alignments for stunting and slanting, and how you use your line games, your twists, how you teach the footwork, how you teach the penetrator and the looper, and all of these things, to actually get a defensive lineman purposefully free. I don't ever call anything with the design of them not blocking a defensive lineman unless it's a twist. And in a twist, I'm trying to do a 2-for-1 game on them, where I have a penetrator who's trying to get the guy who's blocking him, and then pin the guy who's supposed to be blocking the guy that's looping, and get the looper to come free. So That's how I get a guy to come free. I don't expect them to not block somebody otherwise, unless they're just terrible. And so that's why we don't shoot the gap. Shooting the gap is hoping they just won't be fast enough to get me. And it's like, if that works, it's because you're really fast. It's not because it's a good technique. Like, you won't shoot the gap. Now, you line up in the gap in a pass rush situation. We call that a loose alignment, because it's at that point, if it's 3rd and 7. Now, again, depends on the team you're playing. Play that wing T, they're just going to run 3rd and 18. They're not dropping back to pass because they suck at it. The best they've got is a 5-yard hitch. So 3rd and 18, they're going to run trap and just see
trap
what
it up,
happens.
baby.
Yeah.
Yep.
They're going to run trap and see what happens. And if you're trying to pin your ears back, they're going to trap your loose alignment pass rushers, and they're in the next level. So, but if you are at a team that actually is probably going to throw the ball on 3rd and 17, that is where you can use loose alignments. And what you've done in that case is you've said, if we use a jet tag, we're going to jet this. So when we jet it, we widen the stance a little bit, and we might sub in some guys that are better pass rushers, speed rushers, who don't worry about keying down blocks and stuff. When we jet it, what we've told them is, there is no, you're not key reading now. There's no down block. There's no reach block. There's no base block. There's not even a screen block. When we jet you, it is pass. And if we're wrong, that's on us.
Yeah.
Because I expect you, because if you jet, like, guys will get mad about screen retrace when they told him to pass rush. It's like, well, you told him to run by the guy. And then he did, because the guy let him. That's why screen is a great call in those 3rd and 17 situations, is because they're in a jet mindset, whether it's been called or not by the other team. They're in a jet mindset. So trap and screen draw are great, because they're in a get up the field. They're not key reading now. So run something that if they were key reading would be hard to run, but if they're not key reading is easy to run. So that's the mindset of the loose alignment, and why you can't use it all the time at all in high school.
You kind of stumbled into territory I was going to work towards, was the, when you start aligning for stunts and twists and all that, because I think that's the next step. Like, you get your base, maybe it's a 31 over front, but it becomes pretty difficult unless you're going to long stick somebody and you're really going to take your 9 tech or 6, wherever you play him, and run him all the way down inside, right? And now I'm trying to loop either an inside backer or, God forbid, you try to run a defensive tackle out there, maybe a 3 tech outside of a 6 or a 9. That's kind of chaotic. But, those are just other places you can use those alignments, I think, when you start game planning them and
Right.
trying to pair it with linebacker run support. I guess if you're in a 3-3 stack, every play you kind of are, right? Because you start attacking in stacks just as much. Like, I think about blocking them in stacks, but I guess you're also playing stunts, twists, any run game stopping defense. You're calling that in stacks, I would assume, right? I mean, you're building an over and under, but it's still a linebacker coming to fit that gap. So you have to do something to align to make him be successful, right?
Yeah. So what we look at with those is, we talked about there's a base, there's a disguise, but we call them base, movement, and aggressive. Movement calls are your stunt calls, where it looks like one thing and it turns into another, but it doesn't affect the back end. So, and the same thing, the back end can look like one thing and run another. It doesn't affect the front's run fit. So, like,
right.
It looks like it's press man, and then they bail, and it's a press bail cover 3. So the force and the spill and everything doesn't change the way it would if I was running an actual cover 0. But on the front, it looks like a 4-2, but then I'm going to pinch, or I'm going to slant, or I'm going to twist. And it doesn't affect the back end. They're still running our base cover 3 or base cover 1 or pattern match or whatever it is. And so in the 3-3 and in the 3-4, your base is actually a form of movement. And so, if I'm running a 3-4, my base is always aim stud, or whatever you want to call it. Aim Sam, aim stud. We call it stud before. But my base would be to bring the strong side linebacker and slant weak. And what that does is it creates a 4-2 front. And so that is a form of movement, but it is our base because it's what we do all the time. So even in those defenses, you need to have a base. And now the 3-3 is a little bit different. It can change with the 3-4 as well, but it really is pretty much with the 3-4, you're either going to slant weak and bring the strong side outside linebacker, or slant strong and bring the weak side outside linebacker. And one of those two is probably going to be your base call. Unless you want to, and then there's a 5-2s that have both of them up, but then your base is a 5-man rush. So your base is, whatever it is. It's a little bit different, but it's a different mindset. But in the 3-3, you very much can build your base call every week. They run strong side power. I want to close off B gap and C gap strong side. And so my base is going to be usually 2 or 3 different ways to close off B gap and C gap strong. And maybe even C gap and D gap or outside edge. So different ways to do it. So in that respect, my base can change from week to week in the 3-3. So 3-3 is really interesting. The mindset you have in the 3-3 of using those calls, and it can be more of a week to week disguise rather than having every week there's a base call. Going in, there's a plan for something that's a base call. Going in, I mean, I would say, like, honestly, there should be something that the plan is to call this 50% or more of the time. And I would shoot more for like a 70% of the time. The plan is to call this call. And in practice, I am scripting that we are calling this 50, 60, 70%. It's our base call going in. It may not end up being our base call. We may find something else and is better for us. But the plan going in is this is the base call. And it can be different from week to week.
Awesome. Well, I think we checked all the boxes today, talking alignments for inside defensive linemen and some outside. So let's pay level up.
Level up.
Almost forgot to level up. What's your level up today, sir?
Mine is it was the day after Christmas. So I think I mentioned on a different podcast, my previous podcast, my wife had to work Thursday and Friday, and so to get to go see my dad, I just she didn't have a weekend, a 3-day weekend this week, this month. Usually she has 1 3-day weekend in a month, at least, and didn't have one this month. So in fact, usually it's like a 4-day weekend the way they set up. She just works 4 days a week, but didn't happen this month because of Christmas being on a Wednesday. So I went to visit my dad with my son, and my son is I am the third. My son is the fourth, which makes my dad junior. Senior played at Alabama, and we're hoping that we're getting back to that because
There we go.
Because my dad and I played at Randolph-Macon. Nothing wrong with that, but So, but anyway, it was fun. It was the first time that my son has been with just me, away from mom, for an extended period of time, which was a little traumatic probably for mom more than son. But getting to do that trip and spend a couple of days with my dad, and just be there was a lot of fun. And so that would be my level up. I mean, nobody. It was not a horrible situation. I know that I would never want to have to do that on my own for an extended period of time, but managed to survive. With dad's not a nurturer, so it's not like when my wife takes our son to her parents and grandma's there. It's just dad, and so
it's a lot different.
Yeah, it's a little different. It's pretty much on my own in that respect. But that would be my level up.
I think mine has to be video game related this time around, and it's my 6-year-old he's had his Nintendo for almost 2 years now. He's got a Switch, and sometime last year my wife bought me one as well, and so we just started sharing games because it's all under my account anyway. But we got into it was on sale for Christmas, the Lego Avengers game, or Marvel. It's not actually the Avengers, it's Marvel. But that's a pretty sweet gig for like $5 or whatever it cost us. And we can get on there and play together. And it's a level that we can both play. There's a bunch of puzzles in it. And, we talk all the time about there's a huge upside for letting your kids play video games. The time is the killer. You can't let them go over, I think it's 3 hours a day.
Right.
And something we set a 2-hour alarm and then give him another hour after the alarm goes off. But just getting into where we can both get in a game and play. It's not too advanced for him. It's not too boring for me. That's pretty hard to find. So that game is kind of hit right there. So it was pretty neat. Just a couple days after Christmas, just kind of chilling, playing some 2-player video game, watching him solve problems on the fly. Now it's like he came up to me last night and was like, hey, I figured out how to do these 5 things without you even in the room. And they're the more complex things in the game. So it's been pretty neat to watch. 1, to get the family time. 2, developing and teaching him something, because I'm also not very much of a nurturer. Like, we have a task to do. You know what I mean? Let's go do a thing.
Yeah.
The military thing is it's real with me. I can't. It's hard for me to just sit down and play.
Yeah.
But this has given us a place that we can kind of, my Venn diagram comes together. Him being a kid, me being an adult, and we can play that game. So if you're looking for one, there you go.
It is. I think the book. The study's in a lot of different places, but there was one book, Gamification, which is a decent book. Wasn't life-changing for me, but talks a lot about that 3-hour limit, and all the advantages of playing video games that are there. It's not a book about video games. Gamification is more about using the idea of essentially goal setting, right?
Right.
You turn everything into a game. We've talked about that before. So that's the idea. But that in the video game world, that goal setting and the sense of achievement that you get from solving puzzles. And obviously, the there was a different study that came. Forget where I read it. Was I think it was Wall Street Journal. It was about taxi cab drivers from New York and Chicago, and they, not Uber drivers, like taxi cab drivers in New York and Chicago,
Right.
and they have the lowest rate. And so obviously, this is talking about people who were doing it before you got to just put up your ways and follow it. They have the lowest rate of Alzheimer's. And the theory is that it's because they always have to or had to figure out the fastest route to get somewhere based on traffic and remember where things are and how I'm going to get there. And they didn't have time to sit and look at a map. They didn't have, and their rate of Alzheimer's, the national rate is something like 3%. And the rate for them is right around 1%. So there's that, if you're using your brain for problem solving, the thing that you were probably told too, and that I was definitely told was, video games will rot your brain and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And it's like, it's actually the opposite. It's actually not only when you're developing, but obviously for a child developing and learning these problem solving skills, but for an adult, I have problem solving skills. That's great. Do you use them? And if you're using them, it's actually better for your brain.
It's there's a whole thing there. You can talk about. Well, we get to a whole other level, and I don't want to waste time on that. Yes, play some games and problem solve.
Not a video game, it could be a board game or something, but it's got to be. You got to do something, or anything. You do projects. You can do, different. You and I are both tinkerers and stuff, and I shouldn't be spending my time figuring out how the website works, but I do. I just, every time that there's a problem that comes up, I tell you the first thing that I do is try to solve it. Right. I shouldn't be. I should have a developer, but I don't.
It's fun to learn.
Yeah.
Let's pay the bills and get out of here, boss.
All right, let's go to joedanielfootball.com/system. Get the free guide for developing your ultimate defensive system. Find out why you need a system, what goes into a system, how to install your system, and the 5 mistakes that you must avoid in putting together, installing, using, running your ultimate defensive system. Go to joedanielfootball.com/system.
Awesome. Talk about the Patreon, I suppose. Patreon.com/Chamberlain Football Consulting. It's a great place to go in the off season. Hook up with me. We'll have some conversations. Look at your playbook. Just do all the little things I've picked up in my 5 years that have helped me become a more efficient coach. For X's and O's, I still push you to joedanielfootball.com/systems right now. So, yeah, go there. Social media wise, I'm at Coach Chambo OK on Twitter/X. You can email me at chamberlainfootballconsulting@gmail.com. If you want to come on the podcast, be a guest, want to come talk ball, if you just want to, whatever. I like talking football, even in the off season. It's still my main thing. Keep the main thing the main thing. So that'd be a place to reach out. Joe, where can we find you?
You can find me at joedanielfootball.com. Joe at joedanielfootball.com is my email. Someone will help you there. At Football Info and on Twitter, X, and then Joe Daniel Football on the other stuff. The Instagram, joedanielfootball.com/ or facebook.com/Joe Daniel Football. YouTube, for YouTube, just go to joedanielfootball.com/YouTube. But it is Joe Daniel Football. It just has a wonky link. And the suddenly life again TikTok at Joe Daniel Football. Not my account, but it has been pardoned for the time being.
There we go. It's gained life. If this is your first time listening to the Football Coaching Podcast, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. You can find us on your favorite podcatcher, especially Spotify and Apple Podcast. If you're have been listening for a while, please leave us a review. We like 5-star reviews. If it's not, holler at us. Let us know why. Maybe it's something we can change up. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Football Coaching Podcast. Remember, coach simple, play fast, win.